I thought Warhammer was just buying miniatures and playing a tabletop game. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Because there are things about this hobby that nobody really explains to beginners until you're already deep into it. Warhammer is not one hobby. You think to yourself, buy army, play game, what's so complicated? But the reality is you accidentally enter painting, building, collecting, lore, list building, storage, hobby tools, content consumption, and the social media community stuff. The important insight is this: the hobby slowly expands around you. You don't notice it happening, and one day you realize you own paints you never planned to buy, you watch lore videos at 2 in the morning, you're researching carrying cases of all things, and you're debating factions you don't even play. At some point I realized I wasn't just getting into a game, I was getting absorbed into an entire ecosystem. This is why Warhammer becomes expensive and addictive, not because of one purchase, of one impulse buy, but because every part of the hobby leads into another part, and all of it is interconnected. And honestly, that leads directly into the next thing nobody warned me about. Buying more does not mean more progress, and that's a bit counterintuitive. More boxes equals more progress, that's what you would think. But the reality is, more boxes usually means you're just gonna get overwhelmed. Now, I get super excited for making a new purchase, a new limited edition box. But the reality is you need to finish said box. And unfinished projects have a way of piling up, and so does the guilt shame start to pile up as well. Constantly switching focus means your pile goes up and your finished pile stays low. I realized quickly that collecting Warhammer and progressing in Warhammer are not the same thing. And the realization here is that buying gives you an instant dopamine hit, but painting, building gives a delayed satisfaction. That imbalance will trap you. Games Workshop has a talent of making purchases feel very productive, like you're going somewhere. But in actuality, you're not really making any progress. And one finished unit feels better than 5 unopened boxes sitting on the shelf gathering dust. And honestly, a huge part of the problem starts with choosing your faction. Choosing a faction is way harder than it looks, because you think to yourself, I'll just pick the coolest army. But then, lore changes your opinion. Painting difficulty matters, playstyle matters, cost matters, meta changes, and of course, good old YouTube influences you constantly. Until eventually, every faction in the game starts looking tempting, and that's dangerous. Because the longer you stay in Warhammer, the more every army starts convincing you to buy it. You start thinking to yourself, maybe I picked wrong. Chasing aesthetics versus gameplay, or getting distracted by the numerous new releases. My realization is that a faction you love visually is usually a lot better than a faction that is strong temporarily. Because GW constantly rotates spotlight attention between factions. And once you finally pick an army, well, then the real time commitment starts. Everything takes longer than you expected. You see a box and you think, I'll build this tonight. But the reality is, clipping, cleaning, mold lines, gluing, priming, painting, fixing mistakes, and basing. One unit quietly becomes a multi-day project, as the hobby teaches you patience whether you want it or not. The self-reflection here being the fact that Warhammer made me realize how impatient modern gaming has made me over the years. One of the key aspects being never underestimate painting times, especially if you're a perfectionist. You need to understand that your progress will be slower. Not only that, you're also going to open up yourself to burnout from trying to do everything perfectly. And the huge beginner lesson that I learned here is that done is better than perfect. People with amazing armies aren't necessarily faster, they're just more consistent. And honestly, consistency gets really hard once the hobby starts messing with your wallet. Games Workshop is really good at making you spend money. You're thinking to yourself, I'll start by buying an army. Fantastic. But then, suddenly, special paints, brushes, upgrade spurs, terrain, storage, codexes, limited boxes, limited this, limited that, hobby tools, all of it starts feeling necessary. GW understands hobby psychology extremely well. A lot of Warhammer purchases feel small individually until you realize how fast they stack together. As the hobby constantly creates this micro FOMO, you always feel slightly behind, slightly missing something, and slightly tempted, or very tempted. Honestly, Warhammer is probably the only hobby where buying a tiny plastic upgrade sprue can somehow cost the same amount as a full game on Steam. As the key insight that I realize here is that the expensive part isn't one big purchase, it's the endless stream of small or tiny purchases. And weirdly enough, after all of that, I realized something even stranger about the hobby. And that is that watching Warhammer can become the hobby. You think to yourself, I'll mostly be playing or painting. But the reality is that you spend massive time on watching lore, watching painting videos, not actually painting, just watching somebody else paint, ranking videos, news, drama, battle reports, faction discussions, you name it. Sometimes a lot more than the actual hobbying per se. As Warhammer content creators keep you mentally inside the hobby even when you're not actively playing. At some point I realized I was consuming more Warhammer than actually doing Warhammer. I was constantly looking for that inspiration loop, and of course that caused a bit of community discussion addiction, and of course YouTube simply fueling faction temptation or FOMO, and the hobby becoming part entertainment ecosystem rather than anything else. As the content side of Warhammer is basically almost as big as the tabletop itself now. And probably what's the most scariest thing about all of it, you can fall deeper into Warhammer without even touching a miniature. But honestly, despite all the frustration and money, there's one thing that surprised me the most. Your first minis matter a whole lot more than you think, and let's be honest, they're not gonna be your best. They're probably not gonna look great, but they will become emotionally important anyway, as they become a memory marker, proof that you started. I can already tell I'm probably never gonna throw away my first badly painted miniature, and somehow I treasure that one more than the latest minis, which are a lot better painted. I remember the fear of ruining my models, the shaky hands, the wanting to be perfect early on, the attachment to the Imperial Fist, which was my first faction that I chose to go for. And you can also see the visible improvement over time, which is mind-boggling from mini to mini. The hobby becomes more rewarding once you stop trying to instantly be good at it. The important insight here is that the people who stay in Warhammer aren't usually the people who started perfectly. They're the people who keep going. Overall, Warhammer can be overwhelming, expensive, time-consuming, addictive, but still incredibly satisfying. Honestly, even now I still feel like I'm only beginning to understand the hobby. But it's not all about me, is it? Tell me, what's the one thing you wish somebody had told you before getting into Warhammer? As always, my name has been Lazar, and I'll see you in the next one.